All right, well,
There we
welcome
go.
everyone. It is good to see everybody here. My name is Myles Werntz. I'm the Director of Baptist Studies and the Director of the Baptist Studies Center here at Abilene Christian University. And you are joining us for the first webinar of 2023. Our theme for the Baptist Studies Center webinars for the 2022-2023 academic year has been, where do we go from here? So in the fall, we hosted the Texas Baptist Women in Ministry Annual Conference and looked at a variety of forms of renewal. Personally, within churches, within society that are needed. We visited with a church real estate expert to help us think about the uses of property in churches in the future. And we visited with Ryan Burge, sociologist, who helps us to understand kind of the future of American churches and how that will not look like the past, either in terms of attendance or how these things are sorting themselves out. And so all of these are available in our YouTube channel. Would love for you to go check any of those out. So, but today, I am delighted that we are visiting with Dr. Katie Fruge, the Director of the Center for Cultural Engagement and Director of the Christian Life Commission with the Baptist General Convention of Texas. Dr. Fruge holds both an MDiv and a PhD, and her doctorate focused on the image of God as a foundational doctrine for a holistic understanding of advocacy and human dignity and worth. And so since joining the CLC, she's worked to highlight various issues surrounding cyclical poverty, including food insecurity, educational disparities, and a whole host of other issues. If I could get everyone to mute themselves, that'd be really helpful.
I think you can also mute if you're the host,
let me just do
FYI.
that. Yep. I'm gonna go ahead and mute everyone. Sorry, everybody.
Literally my worst fear. Like, I will quadruple check that I'm muted sometime. Because if it can go wrong, it will go wrong.
Yes, I understand. I
feel like all of us saw some of those like nightmare scenarios right when COVID shut everything down, of people whose camera was on or their thing was on and did like private personal things in front of like an entire company. It was awful.
Yep, that's all right. Hang on just one moment and we'll get going. Okay, I think we're good. All right, so we have Dr. Fruge with us today to help us to talk about technology. So Katie, let me before we get started with kind of what I hope will be a really informative and a bit broad, like wide-ranging conversation about the role of technology in the Christian life these days. Can you tell us a little bit about your ongoing work? There may be some of our audience who are unfamiliar with both the Christian Life Commission and the Center for Cultural Engagement. What are these entities, and what broadly do they do?
Yeah, so I work for the Baptist General Convention of Texas, and when you think about a state convention, really it's almost like saying, like, what is the city of Dallas doing, or what is, I live in Fort Worth, because there's a lot of different facets to all the work we do, but we serve and connect with our local churches and trying to provide resources to them, recognizing that we really are better together, that we can do more when we do stuff in connection with one another. And so my task kind of is twofold. So as the director for the Center for Cultural Engagement, our center really is in charge of kind of being the outward reaching, connecting outside the four walls of the church center. And so we've got our ethnic ministries, we've got African American, Texas Baptist Espanol, and intercultural ministries, which really represents the ethnic minority voice in the convention, making sure that they're uplifted and held and celebrated. And then we also have Baptist chaplaincy relations that go a whole spiel about how chaplains can reach into corners that really are untouchable for so many in our society. And then we also have the Christian Life Commission, which I also serve as the director of. And the Christian Life Commission has a really special, unique history. I believe you and I met when you were a commissioner for the CLC. And we started, I believe, in about a little over 50 years ago. We're going to our 70th year now, in the 1950s, and speaking to Texas Baptists, not for them. It's a little bit of a unique role to be the voice of accountability into a convention, to speak into them, to speak out into issues that we think are pertinent or important in that conversation. So in the 1950s, the CLC led the charge in speaking out about racial reconciliation and the sin of racism within the state of Texas. That was an interesting conversation in the 1950s. and really try to stand on the shoulders of our predecessors to continue looking out at the cultural landscape and saying, what are the issues that we need to be speaking into right now? So at any given time, the CLC could be talking on issues from LGBTQ to tech and how we should be considering that and where we need to be careful of. So it's pretty wide ranging, but it's an exciting thing. It's just really getting to be a bridge builder, hopefully, and be prophetic and speaking truth and love.
So you've been spending a lot of time on the road and in congregations doing a variety of things. We mentioned briefly about some of the poverty initiatives, some of the educational initiatives, the racial reconciliation initiatives that the CLC has been involved with. But you've been spending a lot of time over the last several months in congregations and on the road talking about the role of technology within the Christian life. So there have been a lot of new developments within tech, a lot of buzzy stories in the last few months. But I want to, before we get into kind of some of these material questions, let's take a step back and ask this basic question: that why should ordinary Christians care about any of these kinds of developments? Like, what is
Yeah,
it about? Yeah, go ahead.
it's a fair question. Why should I even care about this, right? Especially if you're the kind of person that feels like you don't really feel connected to tech, or you don't feel of your life. It could be easily something that you just gloss over and say that's something for Silicon Valley. But on the flip side of that, when we look at the realistic numbers, you've got about 7.8 billion people in the world. 4.2 billion of them use social media. That's over 50%. So that means 1 out of every 2 people on the planet are using technology of some sort. And almost 3 billion people on the planet have a Facebook account. That's wild. That many people are connected in that way. You talk about people who are mobile phone users. There's about 5.2 billion mobile phone users in the world. 85% of them report having or utilizing social media in some capacity on their phone. So in a world where the average person is also spending a little over 2 hours on their phone and social media every day, these numbers are astronomical. So we're kind of creating this culture where tech or social media is rapidly being consumed, distributed, discipling us. And rarely have we seen a product that's been so widely consumed, but so wildly unregulated. We just haven't considered very carefully so many different pieces to it. And I think of Philippians 1, and where he says that we need to be able to discern what is best and pure and blameless for the day of Christ. We just need to be careful and be wise as we navigate these challenges, realizing it's everywhere. It's not something that the Pandora's box has been opened and there's really no putting it back. And so it's really just trying to just know how to navigate this kind of unknown digital age. Oh, I think you're on mute now too.
It seems like when you're describing the role of tech and the way in which it is playing out in the world globally, that this is in part an anthropological question, right? It's reshaping what it is for us to be, not just for us to relate to one another, but for what it is for us to be human, right?
Yeah.
How we conceive of ourselves, how we conceive of others, how we relate to others, the way in which our habits and passions and intellect are all being shaped. That this is
Yeah.
becoming the unavoidable question, right? So could you say a bit about, like, what does tech have to do with us being human? And in what ways does technology further this? And what ways does it inhibit it? I know that's kind of a broad question, but it just kind of give us your basic thoughts here.
Yeah, as I've thought about this question, it's interesting because if you think about tech in general and really take it away from the internet or anything like that, but just technology has been advancing for thousands of years. But technology, from its very basic place when it started, was to really help enhance the human experience, that we would see a problem and we would come up with a solution for that problem. And so technology has always been this aid to try to help advance or enhance the human experience. But as we're seeing kind of this new digital dawn, this age of advancement, it's really beginning to make us question at a very fundamental level, like, what does it mean to be human? Like, what is the human experience and how would we be enhancing that? It's a very fundamental, like you said, anthropological understanding of ourselves. Like, where do we start with our own self-understanding and our self-determination? it gets a little scary. A lot of times we hear words like algorithms and we have a loose understanding about what an algorithm is. But as you start to kind of dive into that, it just makes us kind of have to hit the pause a little bit and just ask some deeper questions. The most advanced algorithms right now, they work on what they call a neural network, which is this deep learning algorithm where it essentially starts to learn you better than you learn yourself. So we think to be human, we've got this self-awareness and we understand how we are, and no machine could ever replicate that. Well, now we have machines that are actually not only understanding us, but they're having insight and connecting things inside of us that we didn't even know were there. So it's a very fascinating situation to be in. I'm gonna give you a real life example of where we see this kind out and really especially these algorithms showing something about the human condition or how the algorithms are reading into it. So take a platform like YouTube. So YouTube is one of the most popular platforms in all time, and it's used literally across the globe. So when YouTube first started, it was really more of an entertainment type of site. You maybe watched the Charlie Bit Me video that we all probably saw a million times. It was music videos. And at the time, the algorithms were really just going for clicks. They just wanted you to click on their video. So they were pretty basic, but what they found is the buzzword we all know, it's like clickbait or something like that. So as long as I've got a catchy title or something, then you're going to click on my thing. And so they kind of fine-tuned it and they said, well, we don't want just clicks because clicks doesn't tell us anything. We want watch time. So then they adjusted the algorithms again and started saying, how can we put something in front of you that you're going to want to watch the whole way through? So then they started trying to increase watch time. Well, then it just started showing you the same thing over and over again. So it's going to show you a cat video and you're like, wow, I love cat videos. And it shows you another cat video and another cat video. And so they were like, well, we've got the watch time down now. We want to maximize watch time though. So now using these neural networks, the algorithms on YouTube started saying, well, if you liked cat videos, you may also really like this funny dog. And you may also really like this. So then it starts putting things in front of you. It's not the exact same thing. It's actually trying to increase and predict what I'm going to even like. Now that's a little terrifying for people to be like, I didn't know I would like a funny dog video, but somehow this algorithm did, and it put it in front of me. And so it's really kind of showing us that there are insights that they have, these algorithms are having into what it means to be a human. It's kind of leading towards this holy grail of technology that we know is artificial intelligence. That if a machine can think independently, if it can learn, if it can grow and mature, we just have to go back to these questions of what does it mean to be human? We've historically placed so much of our anthropology on our ability to be a thinker. What do we do if we take that out of the picture? What does it still mean to be made in the image of God? Where is human dignity based? How are we going to understand ourselves if there's an outside man-made machine that is thinking just like we used to think was so special within us? So it's an interesting concept and problem to think through.
Yeah, just a kind of a note to everyone. As we're talking, the chat is open. Go ahead and drop your questions. You can either drop them direct to me or for everyone to see if you want. And we'll start fielding some of these here in just a few minutes. So what are some of the major developments that ordinary church folk should be aware of? Can you give us kind of name two or three? You've named like a couple already. But if you were as you're going around and you're talking with Christians who are trying to wrestle with the ways in which our world seems to be inextricably linked to new forms of technology, whether it's the way in which our relationships are mediated by social media, the way in which our educational institutions and our institutions of government seem to be making decisions on the basis of algorithmic assessments or high impact, high quantities of data. Like these are all, there doesn't seem to be a way in which we can really get outside of a lot of these technological developments. What are some of kind of the major things in addition to say social media that Christians need to be kind of attuned to, that we need to be aware of?
Well, you've kind of already started hearing these buzzwords like metaverse that you're hearing a lot of platforms starting to push. Everyone famously knows Meta is the new name for Facebook. Facebook or it's their platform. And it's a direct nod to this idea of this concept of metaverse. And metaverse is this kind of already not yet kind of quirky thing that we're really not even sure what it's going to look like yet, because it's a digital world that's very immersive by its very nature. It's engaging in a way that the internet's not yet. And we see little windows to it, but there's not like a place. And I had somebody, it was really funny. I was at a church speaking about the metaverse a few weeks ago, and they were like, well, how do I log into the metaverse? Like, do I go to metaverse.com? And I'm like, no, it's not like that. It's just this wholly immersive online experience where we're engaging and connecting with people across a whole host of platforms. It could be in a whole lot of different ways. We could go into a mirrored reality. We could go into an augmented reality. We could go into a virtual reality. All of those are various forms of the metaverse that are kind of this already not yet kind of coming at us like a freight train thing that we probably just need to be aware of, and probably are consuming in ways that we don't even realize we're being a part of right now. If you are logging in to connect with friends, on a gaming device, and you're talking and playing on a one localized game, but y'all are playing across the world. That's a very simplistic form of the metaverse. Y'all are all logging in from different locations to meet in one centralized location. And so it's really just kind of this big umbrella term, and people are even still split on the future of that. About 47% of people think that it's really not going to go anywhere. About 53% of people think it's going to be a huge part of our lives by like 2030, 2040. And so we're kind of discovering that as it's unfolding. I kind of think that, especially if we're talking about more Gen Z and then the upcoming generation behind them, Gen Alpha, they're going to be a lot more interested in some of this stuff that seems quirky to boomers, especially, or people older. They do not want to go online and connect with people, but this is, especially for younger generations, the main meeting place and on-ramp for a lot of people. So that's going to be a big piece, and they're connecting on places like that. And then kind of more recently, another kind of interesting tech development that I know you're probably very familiar with as a professor is this fantastic thing called ChatGPT, which is fascinating. We've had technology like this before, but never in verbal written out form. And so we've had the ability for AI to create pictures, maybe do music, but ChatGPT is fundamentally changing and kind of opened a new Pandora's box, because it's a chat box that can take all of the capabilities and the research aspects that maybe Google used to have. But Google, unlike Google, like what ChatGPT is doing is it's looking at all the words in all the world that it has access to, and it's seeing what, and just incredibly high rates, it's connecting points of interest between all of those words. And then it's predicting the P in that ChatGPT, it's predictive text. And so it's looking at all the words, and it's starting to learn and predict the word that comes after that. So a real simple example is, I say, twinkle, twinkle, little star. You're probably going to think in your head, how I wonder what you are, because you have predicted, because of all the knowledge of all your words, that lineup is how that works. That's essentially what ChatGPT is doing. And so it's going to write essays for students. Some people are saying it's going to have huge advancements for teaching, education. Plagiarism is a big issue, but it's just going to be an interesting on-ramp and a tool that especially the younger generation are going to be interested in using.
There's a lot of implications, I think, for education. There's been lots of conversations that my colleagues and I at other institutions have been having around, given that this is, like you say, this is out of the box, right? This is already it's in the wild. It's being used. I was reading an article this morning talking about a scientific journal that realized that a number of its abstract submissions that have been given to it over the last month and a half have been generated by ChatGPT, right? Not actually like human generated.
A Massachusetts lawmaker introduced a bill I think it was this morning or yesterday, that was written with the assistance of ChatGPT.
So, yep, it's out there. It's not going anywhere. So I'm gonna go ahead. I got one more question here, and then I think I'm gonna start throwing it up into some of the questions that we're getting. How do you see these new developments changing the way that churches minister?
I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I really think that this is an exciting on-ramp for people who may not be in on a traditional Sunday morning, that can be very overwhelming or uncomfortable or unfamiliar for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And so
Mhm.
technology especially is going to be an awesome opportunity if we're willing to kind of lean in to the opportunity that it is. Man, especially talking about reaching the younger generation, having an engaging, especially engaging, like actually connecting, liking their post, or offering opportunities to connect via in a virtual setting really is going to be an interesting on-ramp for churches to be able to connect people. Now, the challenge is going to be trying to connect with them there and then getting them connected in a real and meaningful way in a local community, because I think that that is where the gospel transformative work really does have its greatest impact. But it doesn't mean, I mean, Paul, met people in the Areopagus so that so he could draw them into relationship with Christ. So it's becoming all things to all people that we might win some, but really kind of keeping our eye on the prize and knowing where the line is between artificial relationships and how do we draw them into meaningful gospel relationships.
Yeah, so I'm gonna exercise a little prerogative since I'm hosting this thing. I want to follow up on that question in particular. So talk to like one of the recent developments that has happened since 20, well, it was accelerating prior to this, but has accelerated since 2020, is the rise of digital church,
Yeah,
right? Um, this was not something that was novel to 2020, that you have
right.
a variety of churches that were hosting kind of online forums or online spaces. There were, for most of them, I think they were fairly rudimentary, but there wasn't a whole lot to them. But since then, you've seen a lot of churches, and I'm thinking here of a couple of churches that I know of just in the Dallas area alone, that have ministers to digital campuses. Right,
Mhm.
this is the whole job description, is to work with people in an online setting. Um, so give us kind of your assessment of this new development, like the online church, the digital church, the meta church, whatever, however you want to phrase it. Give us kind of your assessment here.
I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to have a hard pause on reflecting on the ecclesiological purpose of the church.
Mhm,
We serve and are, Christians for 2,000 years have celebrated and worshiped a physically risen Lord.
mhm,
And so I would contend that there's value and maybe even like more of a greater like existential like meta truth to be able to connect physically with one another, that there's something about being human that is also being embodied that was important even to the resurrection of the Lord. It was very important that Thomas saw the scars in his hand, that he saw like, you're
mhm,
really here, he's not just a ghost or an apparition, that he was physically risen, and that his disciples saw that and affirmed that and truth. And as we gather as believers, is that an important piece to it? So we want to connect and have these relationships, and I never want to belittle the authenticity of the relationships that people make online. We want to steward that so well. We want to affirm the connections, but I also think providing perspective, this emotional spiritual attachment, is actually scientifically connected still to our physical body. Serotonin and dopamine are physical realities that impact our emotions. They regulate our mood. So things that we do online are impacting our physical bodies. So it's not like what happens in the metaverse stays in the metaverse. It's kind
mhm.
of a misnomer because it still is having an impact on our physicality. So it's training our ministers to understand that and not create some kind of a body soul dualism. I don't think is helpful. It's never worked out well for the church when we've tried to do that, but really to welcome and affirm the physical reality of heaven, the resurrection. When Jesus comes and proclaims the kingdom of God is at hand, we got to take him at his word for that there's a piece of heaven, there's a part of the kingdom of God that's real, that's tangible, that's here now. And we really need to kind of believe in that and act on that and know that it's going to have a physical reality to it, component to it. So those are kind of the main takeaways for that.
Okay, so we have a question here in the chat. Is there a temptation to treat technology, especially AI, as an either or kind of issue rather than as a both and? How do we create healthy both and strategies?
I think it's absolutely both and it would be super easy to say, well, that's just not for us. I've given speeches about the metaverse at churches, and I've heard parents say, well, we're just not going to do that. That's just not for us. And I'm like, you can try that, but my 9-year-old has a Google Chromebook at her There's just certain pieces to technology that just seem to be it's a realistic part of what it means to grow up in 2023. My 3-year-old is a pandemic baby, and she met family members on FaceTime because she grew up in a pandemic and couldn't safely meet her family at the beginning when she was a newborn and vulnerable and susceptible to so many things. So boundaries, understanding, having discussions like this. I'm so thankful when churches invite me to come in and have talks about this, because it means that they're willing to engage to the cultural moment, but also we need to have wisdom here. We need to know what the dangers are within this realm and this universe, and educating ourselves on it, being aware of what algorithms are going to do to us. We often talk about the dangers of AI, and we think about like, oh, our youth are so impressionable. We want to make sure that they've got that. I'm worried about the boomers on Facebook too. Like there's kind of this both and where we're all consuming at massive rates. And so it's having a collective pause and saying, here's just information, because we are called to be wise and discerning. So it's going to have to be a both and. I don't see any viable future forward where it's not going to be part, especially of like my 3-year-old daughter life, her life. I don't see a viable way where technology is not going to be a part of just her day-to-day life.
Okay. All right. So we have, and I have to confess, I'm kind of, when this question came in, I thought, all right, I think you're asking the question that I'm wanting to ask. All right. So here it comes. Ready? Does any of the research or the data suggest that any of these emerging technologies are good for us? So social media, I'm just going to continue. Social media drives mental health struggles for teenagers I pastor. The metaverse can lead to increased isolationism and a false sense of community. Chat GPT is going to disrupt how we create. He said that they want to make, I'm not an anti-tech curmudgeon by any means, but what are the best, what are the benefits of these forms of advanced technology? What's good for us?
Yeah.
Any research you can point us to would be really helpful. Thanks.
So more research is hard when we're talking about something like this. Social media is a little bit easier to measure because we know that there is increased anxiety and depression and issues like that are directly linked to social media. So that one is just hard. I think boundaries are going to be important with that, and helping our kids have meaningful relationships. Again, connecting them back to their bodies, recognizing that what's happening on social media is having an actual impact on your brain chemistry, because you were made with a body, and just connecting that anthropological, to be human is to be embodied. On the chat GPT, I'm cautious for it. I want to be clear. There's a lot of big red flags that I could wave, and we could go down that rabbit trail of all the concerns I have. However, I also think it's got some great potential for tutoring. It could really help become a day-to-day tool that a student could use. So I don't see it as hindering, especially if educators want to help kind of shepherd the students to understand how to use it as a tutorial service. That could be really cool. I had ChatGPT explain to me at a high school level. I asked it to explain the atonement and explain the atonement. I said, can you explain the atonement to me at a high school level? And it redid it again. Can you explain the atonement to me at a middle school level? So for training, for education, this actually may be some low-hanging fruit that we could utilize. And there's already buzzy words about ChatGPT being acquired by Bing. And so we can talk about like maybe some future world where you've got like your metaverse glasses or your Google glasses, and you're like, hey, Bing, where's the nearest coffee shop? And it's going to bing, 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 here's your coffee shop. And while you're walking there, you're like, hey, Bing, I've got to have a really hard conversation with a friend of mine. And can you just give me some advice on how to have a loving but firm conversation? And it's going to give relatively vanilla but helpful information to be able to navigate and walk through some difficult things. So I don't think it's all just, well, the kids are just going to plagiarize and it's just going to become this awful hindrance to creativity. I actually think there's an interesting podcast called Hard Fork, and they interviewed a high school English teacher who is teaching her students to use ChatGPT to write a better story. Like she's having them grade the stories and having her give new prompts and more prompts and more prompts. So they're having to think through, why is this essay so bad? Why is this essay lack nuance? And having to try to push them on that direction. So I think that there's some interesting ways. It doesn't seem like we've tapped out on human potential or imagination yet. It's just pushing us a little bit differently in new boxes and new directions we haven't gone before.
Yeah, I think that there's some interesting ways in which so colleagues have thought, okay, so it may not kill like the traditional essay, it may not kill like the writing assignments, but it will reframe kind of what we can expect with respect to the writing assignments going forward.
Yes.
That maybe it can help be a tutor of sorts for some basic writing skills that they may not possess, and then that'll give us a place to develop on further. I'm trying to be optimistic. When ChatGPT came out, I thought, oh, this is really bad. This is bad news.
It's Pandora's box
Yeah.
for sure. And the
Yeah.
scary thing is, even the people who are writing it, now I am not a programmer by any means. I have
Sure.
dabbled in HTML and CSS. That is as far as my programming skills get. However, even the most advanced people are saying we don't fully understand how it's learning right now. So there's some interesting pauses of concerns. We'll probably see where the limits are on this still. I don't think we've unlocked the potential of full AI yet, but it's going to be an interesting journey to go through.
Okay, I've got another question that's come in. What are some, trying to think how to best phrase this question here. What are some ways in which, so we've talked, the previous question kind of got into like, what are some of the ways in which digital media can malform us, right? That it can exacerbate mental illness, or it can increase feelings of isolation. What are some ways in which these forms of technology might be able to help? What are some, so for example, if a child has underdeveloped social skills, or is struggling to kind of have relationships, or that they're already struggling with mental health issues, like, are there possibilities for these forms of tech to be able to be an asset rather than a liability?
I do think so. Again, it's just going to be finding that sweet spot of helping them connect in meaningful ways online and then drawing that back into the real world. I was giving this speech last year and talked to a dad who said his son is just super introverted, just really shy. It's very painful for him to go out and kind of mingle and small talk and do all these things. But he'll come home and spend hours on Discord. And he said he feels like his son is his truest self when he's on Discord. It's just something about being able to maybe hang out, the pressure's a little off or something like that. And he was so glad that his son had meaningful relationships in this Discord community. And, you know, rightfully was saying, how do we do the next step now? How do we connect meaningful relationships he's making on Discord and translate that into a real life situation?
Yeah, I've got another question that just came in that I think is trying to push us in that direction. So what I hear you saying is, and I think this is right, that a lot of that now that tech is out of the box, there's a couple of different ways of kind of assessing it and handling it. And one way is to try to figure out, well, how do we make the transition from the kinds of ways in which people communicate online, or the kind of ways in which people relate online. So like the example of the child who finds meaningful connection in Discord, how do you like make the next step into, as you say, like flesh and blood relationships? If we know that the Christian life is not a matter of pure concept or pure idea, but is a matter of flesh and blood, the encounter with the risen Christ, right? Then how do you begin to kind of make that transition? How do we get folks that have been engaging and find deep connection on like digital platforms and like digital forms of church? How do we get them into kind of physical gatherings? What does that look like?
I think some of it could be baby steps. I don't think you have to just go straight from you're totally pseudonymous on Discord to now you got to be in a building with somebody. That might be a little hard for some people to make that full jump. But I think that there are ways that we can kind of help be bridge builders in that process. So this is a very millennial story I'm about to give you, but my husband and I actually really got to know one another, believe it or not, on Facebook Messenger. And so it was this hilarious little in-between zone of our relationship where he was sending me messages on Facebook Messenger. I would write him back, and like after a few weeks, we have this very deep relationship. And then we would see each other in real life and be like, I like this is a little awkward.
Tongue
And
tied. Yeah.
yeah, it was, there's some awkwardness there, but it did eventually, we were able to kind of obviously broke down those barriers and we're able to kind of connect the online relationship with the in-person relationship. Now, in a real life scenario, that might be, yesterday we played a couple of rounds of games on videos on the Nintendo Switch with my daughter because she just loves to bond on Nintendo Switch. Like that is her jam. She wants to play Mario Party and all these different things. And she loves Minecraft. I hate Minecraft. Like Minecraft is not my jam. But for the sake of building bridges and helping create meaningful relationships, maybe it's having a Minecraft party and inviting other people in. And maybe after the Minecraft is over, let's have a Zoom where we can see faces so that you're not just a name on there. Like let's actually see who you are and kind of incrementally increase those to be able to get to the point of having physical connections. It sounds like almost a rehab process, but in some ways, if you've got especially people who consume 8, 9, 10 hours of content online, it is a rehab. Their muscles, their social muscles are atrophied. We do know the research shows that social skills did atrophy during COVID-19 and when we were out the shutdowns and stuff. But the good news is just like a muscle that atrophies, you can build it back up. So it's just kind of, we don't want to run in and do the marathon right away, but we want to kind of go and say, hey, let's do a 20-minute walk. Let's do a 5-minute walk. And so maybe it's playing online and then doing a Zoom, maybe playing online and then doing a phone call or something like that.
Yeah, I appreciate you thinking of this as kind of like a rehabilitation process. I think this is, as more than one writer has referred to it, like one of the greatest social experiments of all time has taken place without any sorts of like prerequisites or kind of research. We just kind of dove
We went right in.
full in on first social media and then kind of all the auxiliary stuff that's come out afterwards. And so then thinking about now that some of the effects are beginning to show themselves in terms of long-term use, it does require us to be able to think, okay, so what does it look like? How do we rehabilitate? How do we maybe how do we pull back from this? So what does it look like for churches to help develop these kinds of practices and habits like this, to participate in kind of, to put it in a different way, like what does church look like for churches to participate in this rehab process?
Mm-hmm.
Like how do churches need to think about the way they do worship, or the way in which they get people together in small group settings, or the way in which they connect with folks that aren't already currently at church? Like, what does it look like for churches to model this rehabilitative process well?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that just kind of popped into my head is first just stating this is not original to me. I heard this last week in relation to another conversation, but whatever your group is, your church, your organization, you're perfectly calibrated to get the results you're getting right now. So if you are wanting to get different results, you're going to need to kind of play around and say, where do we need to recalibrate and what's going on here? So if you're seeing a group of your church, or if you're trying to reach out and say, we're seeing like we need some rehab here, or we need to do this recalibration over here. I think just being in a listening posture to say like, how would you like to connect right now? It may mean for the first couple of weeks, just having people like, I don't know why, but we just get this great dopamine burst when somebody likes or comments on our stuff. So it could just be going through and just liking every single thing or commenting on these things, because we know that that's actually having an impact on people's enjoyment on their social media, and just kind of creating those like networks to be able to connect with people. I also love it when churches either invite me or want to have conversations about apps kids are using, social media, like have conversations, because we are so frequently 10 years late to the party, right? Like we're talking about things that like people out in the culture are like, yeah, that was like a thing like 10 years ago and we've moved on and we're way over here now. So having conversations about, the dangers of Among Us or something, games that our kids are playing right now, and just saying, hey, we're having this conversation because we're seeing that you guys are really interested in this, or this is something really popular. So let's have a conversation about it. I think that is a draw. I mean, there's been a few times where I'll make a reference of something like a game like Among Us, and like I'm just met with blank stares, and I'm like, I promise if you talk to your children, they all know what that game is right now. And so just even being culturally aware of where the itches are is going to be helpful in building bridges for there.
Yeah, just not trying to acknowledge that these things don't exist, but finding ways to kind of build bridges and yeah, and to move maybe beyond the strictures of those things. That's good. Okay, so this is kind of a bigger question. Can you give us a vision of how Christians can think about technology theologically? Like where are some of the places that if we're going to develop a theological vision as congregations, how do we begin? I say this because I don't want it to just be like a tactical sort of thing that we're engaging with whatever. It's kind of like whack-a-mole, you know, you're addressing these different iterations of tech as they develop. But what would it look like for Christians to develop a vision, like a theological vision for technology?
I would really almost in some ways, we've kind of already tapped on this a little bit, but take your example from Paul. Paul was more than happy to meet people in the marketplace of ideas. And so he would go to the Areopagus, he would go into the places. And so saying that there's a scriptural, biblical precedent of saying, where is the meeting of marketplaces? And are we being as wise as possible as we navigate these conversations? Because that's also something that Paul called us to do, to be wise and discerning. And so if we don't even know where the conversations are, that's on us. That's a problem. So we need to be careful. I think we have a theological calling to be the sage sound of truth and wisdom. One of the things that's very concerning to me that I think the church needs to be ringing the bell about is those who are pushing and advocating the most for technological advancements. They also stand to profit the most from its benefits. And so as believers, we have a theological conviction that people have dignity and innate worth, and we want to value that. And if somebody is exploiting that, that's on us to call out as well. And so we need to be the sage voice of wisdom, saying they're not all bad. Like we're going to meet in the marketplace and hang out and sit here, you know, in the metaverse or the MySpace or wherever it is in that moment. But we're gonna be wise and discerning having this. And so it's kind of having those two hands, you know, just open, saying, you know, we're gonna be aware of where we're having these conversations, but we're gonna have meaningful, real conversations about them, saying, here's the good parts to it, but then here are the dangers for it as well. So just wise and discerning in the marketplace of ideas really is kind of that feel. And then also just even kind of thinking forward from a eschatological perspective, as we talk about why it matters, we've got to be really careful, again, hitting on stuff we've already hit on, but just the realities of the kingdom of God and being made to be an embodied person. There's so many times I remember growing up thinking about heaven as this kind of ethereal, like just place where we floated. And I'm like, man, that sounds a lot more like the metaverse than it does anything
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
really teaches about when we talk about this beautiful new heaven and new earth, and it's real. And I remember the first time in college, a professor telling me he wanted to farm land in South Carolina in heaven. I was like, that sounds like an awful version of heaven, but it was cool because I was like, I've never thought about farming in South Carolina as an actual iteration of what heaven could be like.
Yeah. I mean, if there's if as the depiction is in Revelation, you have stones and a river and gardens and all the rest, I'm just like, yeah, let's go farm. Eschatologically, it sounds good. Sounds good to me. Well, what else? Anything else that you want to make sure that our audience is at least thinking about, or at least aware of? Any other kind of new developments, or any sorts of kind of closing points that you want to try to hammer home for us here?
Yeah, I don't ever want to seem, I am not an anti tech person. I
Mhm.
think that it's a helpful tool that I enjoy using. You know, I'm all about being aware, you know, enjoying all of those things. But it is an active market, actively seeking out, especially young, impressionable brains and minds. It often will put content in front of our kids that they are not neurologically advanced or developed enough to even understand and comprehend what's in front of them. And there is a huge desire, and I think almost a knee-jerk reaction I often see parents and adults have, where they're just like, they just want to take all of technology away. Like, we're just not going to deal with that. I don't think that that's going to help, especially Gen Z and the younger kids, the emerging adults. know how to navigate this world well. It's going to create a lot of challenges, and the best thing we can do is go through it with them. Don't try to just yank it out, because I don't think that's going to help them. The first time, I know it's not if, but when my kid is going to be exposed to some pretty dark stuff on the internet, because it is active. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is hunting her out. So the first time she's exposed to it, I don't want her to be in a friend's room at 11 o'clock at night and has no idea what to do. I want to create such an open and environmental space that she's able to navigate those things, knowing that those things, there are dark forces out there that are hunting her out, whether it be explicit content or ideas or misinformation. Those are just a part of reality. And so just being aware and having conversations like this, because we want to help our children navigate these things well, and not just our children, our grandparents too. You know, they fall for misinformation as well, and all the other things. And so it's really just helping one another kind of bear the burden.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, as you've been talking, I've been thinking, yeah, it's not really the ones that I see most having the most difficulty putting down Facebook are not my 20-year-old undergrads. They're yeah, it's the adults. It's the adults in the room. Yeah. So that's good. Well, Katie, thank you so much for taking your time. I know you're at a conference in San Antonio today, so I appreciate you carving out some time for us to help us think about this. This is one of the this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end. In that I think congregations needing to develop are going to continue to need to develop resources for understanding and navigating technology well. A couple of things as we're getting ready to sign off here. What are some resources that you would point our audience to? Or anything in particular that comes on the top of your mind that you want to direct our attention to that helps here?
Yeah, a friend of mine, Jason Thacker, just wrote a book called Following Jesus in a Digital Age, and he's got another piece that's coming up soon that he is an edited version with a whole lot of really incredibly intelligent people that are going to have a similar title. So, but that's Following Jesus in a Digital Age is a really good entry-level work if you're just like, man, where do we go from here, or what resources can I put in the hands of my family or my ministers or my pastors at my church or something like that. It's great. It also has an accompanying youth sidetrack, and I get no money. They didn't pay me or anything like that, but I did write an endorsement and I did help them on the algorithm section. So,
good.
But I don't get anything for it. So,
well, it's good to help other people out. I'm dropping the title here in the chat if anyone wants to go check it out. Yeah, I'm looking forward to taking a look at it. There's a number of interesting titles kind of in this range that are coming out this year.
2023, we're catching up. So I think there's going to be, by the end of this year, I think there's going to be a couple of really good pieces that we can point people to. Yeah,
that's good. Okay, the other one I might recommend, and I don't have the link for it, but if you have not, for those of you with kids, with young families, if you haven't read Andy Crouch's Tech Wise, it's a little bit older, but I think is really insightful and really helpful. It's helpful in terms of developing practices as families for navigating a whole range of tech kinds of questions and what tech does to how tech affects our relations for better or for ill. So good. It's really helpful. Okay. Well, Katie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation, and yeah, y'all have a good afternoon.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. If you have any questions, you can find Katie. She's on the web. She's over at the Christian Life Commission page. Would be happy to get your emails and to field your questions and come help out your congregations. If you're interested in information about the Baptist Study Center, feel free to drop me an email, and I would love to chat with you more about the work that we're doing. Okay. Hope everyone has a great day. This conversation has been recorded and will be put online very soon. Okay.
Awesome.
All right, Katie, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Have a good day, everyone.
All right, bye.